So this is a lecture I delivered a few weeks ago as part of my role at the University of Wolverhampton. So I'm sharing this with you guys now. So hopefully the content you'll find useful and you can apply it to your own training as well. So a few things we're going to look at. We're going to have a quick overview of what strength and conditioning is. And then we're going to look at what determines successful running performance. And then following that, we're going to look through a few of the training methods to improve our running performance. So we're going to look at the resistance training methods, plyometric training, and then we're going to look at a few of the technical aspects of our running performance and how we can improve those to improve our running performance. So you may have seen these myths going around. They tend to do the rounds on social media quite a bit. You might have heard them at your running clubs or when you've been speaking to other runners. But hopefully through this lecture we're hopefully going to dispel some of these myths. So some of the common ones will be strength training will make me bulky, therefore they'll make me slower because I'm carrying more mass. Lifting heavy weights will cause me to be injured. Runners should be training for muscular endurance and not strength, so we should be doing higher reps, lower weight, as opposed to heavier weight and lower reps. And then the last one, to become faster, all my training time should be spent on running. So hopefully as we go through this and look at the research, we may dispel some of these myths. So we're just going to have a quick overview of what strength and conditioning is. So the English Institute of Sport defines strength and conditioning is more than lifting weights, and it encompasses the entire physical development of the athlete and what's required to allow them to be the best physical version of themselves. So we do strength and conditioning because it helps us prevent injuries. So if we can stay injury free, we can maintain the level of our training. And if we can maintain our training, we can race. If we can't train, we can't prepare ourselves for a race. We also implement strength and conditioning into our trainings because we get those performance adaptations. So, we may get stronger, we may get faster. More conditioned as well, and those can all help our performance. And we can also peak for a key event. So we periodise our training with our sights on an event. So it may be, we've got 18 weeks until London Marathon. How do we plan out our training? How do we periodise our training in order to peak for that key event? So if we just look through what determines running performance, so if we start off with VO2 max, so VO2 max is a maximum amount of oxygen that we can consume per minute per kilo of body weight. And then there's running economy. So some of you may have done a lactate threshold or a VO2 max test in a sports lab on a treadmill, and you may have had a mask attached to you, attached to a computer. And so running economy is the energy or the oxygen cost, or how much oxygen you're using during a certain speed for a certain period of time. And what that can tell us is if we test before training and then test after training, we may see that we're using less oxygen or less energy at that specific speed, whether that's race pace. And then we can see whether there's an improvement where we don't need to use as much energy or oxygen to perform at that same intensity. And then there's fractional utilization. So this is the ability to sustain a high percentage of our VO2 max. And then there's lactate threshold. So the higher intensity that we run at or train at, there's an accumulation of lactate. And this accumulation of lactate can contribute to fatigue. So the higher our lactate threshold, so the higher intensity that we can train at before our lactate starts to increase or accumulate, the more efficient or more economic runners that we are. So these 4 determinants are capable of predicting our 16-kilometre performance with a 95% accuracy in well-trained runners. So they're very accurate in determining how well we can perform in an event. The only issue with VO2 max is it's a poor predictor of performance in well-trained individuals. So we may have for individuals with a very similar VO2 max, but there could be as much as 30% difference between their performance. So this is where we use running economy. So running economy is the most important feature of physiology to improve, and we can improve that through a number of ways. So if we look at running economy, we can look at the factors that can influence our running economy. And there's quite a few. So I'm not going to go into detail on all of these, but I'm going to highlight a few that as S&C coaches or as individual athletes, we can look at improving through effective training. So we can look at working on our plyometric ability, and we can start to work on our resistance training. We can also work on flexibility, the elastic stored energy, which I'll go through in a moment when I talk through plyometrics. And we can look at ground reaction force. And then we can also look at our muscle stiffness and our body weight and composition. So what actually determines our running speed? So our running speed is determined by the rate of our strides and the length of our strides. So the most economical stride length and stride rate is generally determined by the individual. So this is determined by you, so what's comfortable for you during a race in terms of your step length and your stride rate. If we try and deviate away from our optimal stride length and rate, this tends to increase our energy costs or our oxygen costs. So whether that's trying to put more force into the ground to increase our stride length or trying to increase our cadence, it generally comes at a increased energy cost. So the point of contact on the ground is the only phase during the running cycle in which a runner can produce that force to influence our stride length, thus influencing our running speed. So if we look at this image at the bottom, see if I can just get a laser pointer, there we go. So if we can look at his ground contact here, as soon as he makes contact with the ground, we can see on this force trace on the right, the force being produced over a certain amount of time. And if we look at the, it's gone. So if we look at the curve at the bottom here, this lower curve, this is our horizontal force production. So pushing backwards, and the taller force trace is that vertical force, the vertical ground reaction forces. So runners generally reach faster speeds by applying more force to the ground, not by more rapid leg movements. So as you can start to see here, what we can now work on is our ability to produce more force into the ground during each step. So a successful endurance runner is generally characterized by less vertical oscillation, so less vertical bounce, longer strides, shorter ground contact time. So although I've mentioned that we want to be able to produce more force in the ground, we're restricted by the time constraints that we can spend on the ground. So we want to be able to produce more force over a shorter ground contact. And also there's less change in speed during the ground contact. So this can come into when we talk about our running technique. This may make more sense. So let's have a look at what the research tells us about resistance training. So a lot of the research that I'm going to talk through generally looks at running economy, and so some of these papers that I'm going to show you, they're review articles. So they pull together a load of research from different places, with looking at similar things, and they put all the results together and give us an overall review of the research and what it tells us. So this paper from 2014 looked at strategies that improve running economy, and we found 5 strategies that can improve it. So we look here: resistance training, nutrition, stretching and improving our flexibility, environment, so working in higher temperatures, training at altitude can improve our running economy, and also the main one, endurance training. So this paper identified 15 out of 19 studies where strength training actually elicited improvements in running economy. So that's quite a significant number of papers. that have identified improvements with strength training. So we can't ignore that. So we're starting to build a picture here of, there is a benefit to resistance training. So another systematic review here looked at explosive training. So within explosive training, it's ballistic training, plyometric training, and heavyweight training, and it looked at how these have affected running economy endurance athletes. So a lot of papers here were looked at, but just to make it a little bit simpler, if we look here, everything on the green side of the chart here, all these black bars within this green square, those are where the papers found improvements in running economy with explosive training and heavyweight training. Everything else on the right, they found no improvements or more harmful effects following explosive training and heavyweight training. Again, what we can see is pretty convincing that explosive training and heavyweight training do have or are effective for improving running economy overall. And these are the kind of exercises that were used. So I'll move that. So these are the type of exercises that we would use in explosive training, heavy resistance training. So we've got our ballistics exercises on the left. So we've got our ballistic squat jumps, using a trap bar deadlift, similar movement, trying to put as much force into the ground to get as much flight time as possible with the load that's on the bar. And then we've got our plyometric training. So we see here we're doing a bit of a depth jump, so jumping off a box, and then we want to minimise that ground contact and get as high off the ground as we can. As well, we've got some pogos there as well, so minimising ground contact time, maximising jump height. Also got resistance training exercises here. So what I've done here is I've put a lot of exercises that generally aren't very specific to running in terms of the movements. So we've got our hamstring curls here, and we've got leg presses and hip thrusts. So I've put the hamstring curl in there because, again, like I said, it's not generally seen as a specific exercise that mimics running, but these type of exercises were used in the papers that we've just looked at, and they still find improvements in running economy. So let's carry on with some of the research that discusses strength training and its effect on running economy. So this paper, it's a bit of an old paper, it's 1997, and it looked at strength training in female distance runners and how that impacted on the running economy. So we had 12 female distance runners and we split them up into two groups. We did 2 training protocols for 10 weeks. And the first training protocol was a concurrent training program which looked at endurance and strength training together. So the running mileage was about 20 to 30 miles a week over 4 to 5 days. Strength training included 3 sessions a week, and the volume, or the repetition ranges, ranged from 6 to 20. So the lower reps were usually for the compound lifts, and then the higher reps were for those accessory exercises. The second group, or the second training protocol, was just endurance training only, same mileage, same frequency throughout the week, but no strength training at all. And the way they measured running economy was the oxygen cost over these 2 speeds here. But they also looked at body mass. So again, when we looked at those myths, we looked at the first one, where strength training will make me bulky, thus making me slower. And if we look at the results over those 10 weeks from those 2 training programs, the concurrent training program, so the endurance and strength training program, actually improved running economy by 4%. Our squat 1 rep max improved by nearly 34%, and our bench 1 rep max was 24.5%. So we can see there are really significant changes in our strength, 4% improvement in running economy. If we look here, there's no significant changes to our body mass. So we can kind of dispel that myth now, where there's you won't get bulky from strength training. I I think one of the things with runners is they're doing such a high volume of running, there's that interference effect where there's going to be very little hypertrophy or increase in muscle size from the strength training. It's likely going to be more neural adaptations. So again, another paper here from 2010, it looked at the concurrent strength and endurance training on running performance and running economy in recreational marathon runners. So this was a 2-month training program, and it used these exercises here. So on day 1, we'd look at lower body, and these were done quite low reps, high intensity or high load, so 3 to 5 rep max, quite low volume, so high intensity, low volume. Then on Thursday was generally upper body and core, but we can see here it's higher volume, much higher volume and lower intensity. And what it found, again, with running economy, we're looking at 2 different speeds, so the energy costs or oxygen costs, or from this paper we looked at lactate production, heart rate and RPE. So at those 2 speeds, lactate accumulation was down between at the start of 2 months and the end of the 2-month program. Heart rates at those 2 speeds was lower, and also RPE, so rate of perceived exertion. So generally this is a scale of 1 to 10 or 6 to 20, and it's how hard you feel that you're working at on that scale. So they're reporting that it felt easier at those 2 speeds after a 2-month endurance and strength training program. So what can we take from that paper? Well, a quote from this paper says, recreational marathon runners should be aware that 2 concurrent strength training sessions per week, so a combination of high intensity training for the lower limb and strength endurance training for the trunk muscles, increase muscle strength and do not impair running performance and running economy. So again, by becoming stronger, we're not getting bulkier, we're actually improving our running economy and potentially giving us the ability to run at a higher intensity. Again, another paper, a little bit old, 1999, but you get the message from this. So this looked at explosive strength training on improving 5K performance, so our parkrun performance, by improving our running economy and muscle power. So one thing to note on this paper here, so the papers that we've seen before have been concurrent training, where we've kept the mileage the same or kept our volume of running the same, but added in strength training, which has its benefits as we've seen. But this paper actually looks at reducing the volume of running that the individuals did by 32% and replaced that volume of running with explosive strength training. And again, we looked at 2 groups. So one group reduced their running volume by 32% and replaced it by explosive strength training. The other group only reduced their running volume by 3%. And we've got some of the exercises that they did in that training. So we did leg press, ballistic squat jumps. We also included sprint training in there and hurdle jumps. And generally the volume of training was 5 to 20 repetitions a set. Again, lower repetitions for the compound exercises and higher repetitions for the accessory exercises. And what that study found by the end of the training was there was reduced contact time. So as I said before, we want to be able to produce as much force as we can in a minimal amount of ground contact time. So this paper actually found that they reduced their ground contact time. So we're spending less time on the ground. So we have more steps. We're able to have more steps where we can produce force and propel ourselves forward. It's improved 5K time, and there was a reduced oxygen cost. So from that, we've reduced our ground contact time, improved our 5K time, and that comes at a lower oxygen cost. So if we look at dispelling that myth about the where it says we should be doing, as runners, should be doing higher reps and lower weight as opposed to heavy weights and low reps. Well, this paper actually suggests the opposite. So this looked at 3 training interventions. So heavy strength training, and compared it to muscular endurance resistance training, so higher reps, lower weight, and we had a control group where it just had endurance training only, but what they actually did was they included similar exercises, but they just used a TheraBand, so a resistance band. And what we found was with the heavy strength training, again, lower reps, higher intensity, there was a 5% improvement in running economy. There was a reduction in our 3K time trial, and you can see some of the exercises that they used there. So some compound exercises, heavy strength training exercises, and some explosive training. Compared to the muscular endurance resistance training group, again, same frequency, higher volume, still a reduction in running economy, but not as significant as the heavy strength training group. And if we look at the endurance training only that just used TheraBands, you're doing general prehab exercises, we've seen no change in running economy and no change in 3 kilometre time trial. So why does resistance training and explosive training improve performance or improve our running economy? Well, as I said before, there's an interference effect where runners don't tend to increase their muscle size as much, but there's those neural adaptations. So there's an improved lower limb coordination and co-activation of muscles. So muscles are working together, there's more synchronized. There's an increased stiffness in muscles and tendons. So with that increased stiffness, we're able to absorb force quickly and produce that force at a quicker rate. So it's a quicker ground contact. So we're producing more force over a quicker ground contact time. So these are neural adaptations without observable muscle hypertrophy. So if we look at the benefits of resistance training in regards to injury, so this paper in 2013 looked not specifically at running, but generally at athletes playing sports, and it found that strength training reduced sports injuries to less than a third, and overuse injuries could almost be halved. So when we look at runners, generally we get stress fractures due to the high volume of training that we're doing, generally overuse injuries. And if strength training reduces the onset of overuse injuries by almost 50%, then even if we're not getting that performance benefit, we reduce our injury risk by 50%. And the reason resistance training may reduce the number of injuries could be because of increased structural strength. So we're increasing the strength of our connective tissue, so our ligaments, tendons, cartilage. So they're able to withstand the constant impact and ground contact that we have with the ground as we're running. There's also an increase in bone mineral density. So if we're increasing our bone mineral density, we're able again to withstand that load or that force as we're impacting that force as we make contact with the ground. And generally, increasing bone mineral density will help with the onset of stress fractures that runners tend to see. So now we'll look at plyometrics and how that impacts on our endurance performance. So we'll just do a quick definition of plyometric exercise. So it's a quick, powerful movement using a pre-stretch or a counter movement, which involves a stretch shortening cycle. Now the stretch shortening cycle, or that pre-stretch, is essentially a lengthening of the muscle, or an eccentric contraction of the muscle, and this is generally done quite quickly. And then there's almost like a quick transition phase, and then a concentric action of the muscle, which is what produces our force. So a key component of running economy is our ability to store and use elastic energy produced during the eccentric contraction. So as our muscles are lengthening during that eccentric contraction phase, there's a storage of that elastic energy, which is then used during the shortening phase or the concentric phase during the contraction or the stretch shortening cycle. So plyometric training results in a greater storage and use of that elastic energy, which allows us to decrease our ground contact time and allow us to improve running economy. So the ability to increase our energy storage allows us to increase our force production during a shorter ground contact time, therefore increasing our stride length, which is ultimately going to improve our our running performance. So let's have a look a little bit at the stretch shortening cycle. So the stretch shortening cycle is an eccentric contraction, so a fast eccentric contraction followed by a little bit of a transitional period where there's no change in the length of the muscle, followed by the concentric contraction, which is a shortening of the muscle. So the pre-activation of muscles prior to ground contact is believed to increase that muscle tendon stiffness and potentially enhance our muscular force generation through the stretch shortening cycle. So you've heard me say before or mention the ground contact time, so it's important that we keep that ground contact time brief. And the importance of leg stiffness for running efficiency is well established. So there was a study here in 2007 that looked at the factors relating to top running speed and economy. And it looked at 25 male endurance athletes, and it looked at kind of what factors separated more economical runners to less economical runners. We can see in the green here, change that to the laser pointer. So we can see here the most economical runners displayed contact times of 150 to 165 milliseconds when they're running at 20 kilometers an hour. When we compare that to the least economical runners, they displayed contact times of 170 to 190 milliseconds when running at the same speed. So we can look at some exercises here some plyometric exercises here that will help us improve our running economy. So if I just play that one back there, so this is just a basic counter movement jump and then sticking that landing there. So we're doing two things here. We're trying to improve our ability to power ourselves off the ground. If that plays through there, sorry. So it's our ability to produce as much force as possible into the ground to get as high as we can, and then how well we can stick the landing and absorb that force effectively. Look at another exercise here. So these are pogo jumps. So you can do these on a track or indoors. So again, if you look here at the ankles, toes are pointing up towards the shins. Minimal angle change in the hip, knee and ankle. So promoting that stiffness. And also we're trying to minimize that contact time on the ground and trying to get as high as we can. Another example here, so this is called ankling. So again, just promoting that dorsiflexion of the ankle. Try not to move the mouse too much because it seems to be freezing the screen. But promoting that dorsiflexion of the ankle, so bringing our toes up to our shin, maintaining upright posture. Getting our foot contact as close to our centre of mass as possible or underneath our hips. And this one is bounding, so again, produce as much force into the ground as we can. Maintaining that dorsiflexion of the ankle, so bringing our toes up to our shins again. And bounding off the single legs. And again, if you look at the foot placement there, the foot placement's going under the centre of mass. And we're propelling ourselves forward. So you can see how that starts to mimic the running cycle. So a little bit of research to support the benefits of plyometric training on endurance performance. So two studies here. So the first one up there, which was done in 2014, added 2 30-minute plyometric sessions a week over a 6-week period of normal running training. And it found that it improved 2.5k running performance in highly trained middle and long distance runners. Second study here in 2003 looked at male runners who performed 6 weeks of plyometric training alongside their normal running training, and they found it improved running economy by 4 to 6% across different test speeds, and it also improved 3k time trial by 2.7%. So we can see there 6 weeks is quite a short period to get such improvements of 4 to 6% in our running economy, and it's much cheaper than buying the Nike Vaporflies. So we can look here at how we can progress our plyometric training. So this is a basic model showing some exercises that you can do If you're a beginner with plyometric training, you can start at the foundation level. So we're just developing that eccentric strength, so developing how well we can absorb force or tolerate the force as we're landing. And then we can move down the flow chart. So we can go into development then. So emphasis on the short contact time, so bringing in those pogo jumps or hurdle jumps. Jump height isn't as important during this stage, it's just emphasising that short contact time. So we're developing our reactive strength endurance. So as you can see here, there's mentions of slow SSC, so slow shortening cycle, slow stretch shortening cycle, and fast stretch shortening cycle. And we can see here at the bottom on the left here the difference. So slow stretch shortening cycle is longer than 250 milliseconds, and fast stretch shortening cycle is faster than 250 milliseconds. And as we can see as a comparison, so we look at running, so typical ground contact times during a running cycle is between 160 to 200 milliseconds, depending on how economical you are as a runner. So then we can go into the realization stages. So we're looking at high intensity fast stretch shortening cycles. So we're working in this zone here, so less than 250 milliseconds. And there's more emphasis on the short contact times, but now we're looking at implementing the focus on getting that jump height. And this is going to be maximal effort activities. So really punching into the ground to get as high as we can. And then we can go into the transfer stage. So this is getting more specific into the exercise choice in order to be more relevant to our to running. And again, just another graph here. So a bit of a pyramid chart that shows you how we can progress from developing those fundamental movements at the start, so getting your squat pattern, your lunge pattern, and how we can develop that in terms of increasing the intensity or the complexity of those plyometric exercises, working up to shock training. And again, if it's something that you're interested in, I can go through this in more detail in another video. So here's an example of some of the exercises you can do, and start with a basic progression. So this video on the left here, at the top left, we're just developing our ability to absorb force, so tolerate that force, but then we're adding a jump at the end to be able to produce force into the ground and get as high as we can, and again absorb that force. Second video here at the top in the middle, we're just producing force into the ground maximally. As you can see, he's trying to jump up onto that box, get as high as he can. So just focusing on producing force. Video on the right here. So the videos are a bit jumpy, but the video on the right here, this is like an assisted pogo jump. So he's using those boxes there to take a bit of his body weight off, so reducing his body weight to reduce the intensity of those pogo jumps. And then bottom left here, so we've got some hurdle jumps going on here. Again, we're just minimizing ground contact time. The hurdles are acting as a little bit of a target to get over. So again, quick ground contacts, getting up off the ground as quick as we can, and maximizing jump height. You can also do this another way through the depth jumps. Again, sorry for the videos. So he's dropping off a height, quick ground contact time, and jumping as high as he can. And as you've seen before, a bit more complex with the bounding. So we're going on to single leg work now. So minimizing that ground contact time again, foot landing underneath the hips. If you look at the toes on most of these videos during the ground contact phase, the toes are being pulled up towards the shins, so maintaining that dorsiflexion or maintaining that pre-stretch. We'll come back to the bounding here, propelling himself forward, every ground contact as far as he can. Okay, so last topic we're going to cover in this this video is we're going to have a little look at running technique and performance. So again, as you've seen throughout these different topics in the video, I haven't gone into too much detail because I could be here all day. So if it's something that you're interested in me covering in a bit more detail, please let me know, and I can do so. So A little bit on running technique and performance. So technique's an essential part of training, and it's important that we implement technical training within our running training to develop our energy efficiency. So the more efficient our running technique is, it's going to help our running economy, and it helps prevent injuries. So if we've got a poor running technique, if we're running at such a high volume each week, 50, 60, 70 miles a week, with poor technique or inefficient technique, eventually we're going to have an overuse injury through that. We can also improve our performance by improving our running technique through technical training. So it might be something that you include before your track session. And we can also improve our structural strength parameters. So this study by Folland in 2017 looked at the parameters that are associated with a reduced energy cost and improved performance. And it found 5 parameters that differentiated someone with poor running economy to someone with good running economy or running technique. First thing it found was a less vertical oscillation. So this is, you may see some runners who overemphasize that bounce as they're running. And vertical force is necessary. Vertical force production is necessary in running to overcome gravity. But too much bounce in our running is energy wasted. Second parameter we can look at is braking forces. So we want less deceleration braking forces during the ground contact time. And this generally happens when we're landing with our foot too far in front of our centre of mass. That creates those braking forces that we then have to overcome. And then we've got posture. So during running, we want less transverse plane rotation. So you may see someone overemphasizing that rotation of the shoulders and the hips during running. And we also want less forward and backward trunk lean. So some people, when they're running, especially when they're tired, they've got that excessive lean at the hips. And then we can look at our stride parameters. So we want that lower ground contact time, as we've seen in one of the studies before, when it looked at the difference between more economical and less economical runners with regards to their ground contact. So we want that quicker ground contact time. Last parameter we can look at is lower limb angle. So we want a more extended knee at ground contact. So we want that stiffness in the hip, knee and ankle. So we want the reduced range of motion at the hip and knee during that ground contact. So we'll just go over a few of those parameters. So we can look at vertical oscillation, as you can see in the graph on the left here. What I mean with that excessive bounce with people that have got high vertical oscillation. So they're producing a lot more vertical force rather than, so if you look at their hips may bounce quite excessively. Whereas we've got a low vertical oscillation where there's still that vertical oscillation to an extent, but it's less noticeable. So as I said, we still need to be able to produce vertical force. We produce more vertical force than horizontal force during a run. And if we try to minimize that vertical oscillation too much, it gives us less flight time, which gives us less time to bring the trailing leg forward. Which means we need to produce a quicker cadence. So as I've said, if we try and increase our cadence too much, we're using too much energy to do so. So as I said, it's a bit of a catch-22 there. What we can also look at is our foot placement on the landing. So I'll just play this video. So as you can see on this video here, it's going to freeze in a sec. We can see where he's placing his foot, where it's as close to his centre of mass as possible. So his centre of mass is here. We look at the hips, his foot placement is very close to his hips when he's landing. And this reduces the braking forces that we have to overcome during running. So speed lost during the braking phase has a critical impact on our running economy. And the horizontal distance between the initial contact point and the centre of mass at the body at touchdown should be small in order to avoid that loss of speed during that braking phase of the ground contact. So as we can see here in this runner below in this picture, making contact at the heel quite far in front of the centre of mass. And this means they're going to have to overcome those braking forces, which is going to use more energy to overcome. So it's important that we can try and drill it into ourselves to get the foot placement as close to the centre of mass as possible. So we look at a few drills to improve our foot placement and knee position. These aren't the only drills. It's just a couple of examples that you can use, whether it's at a track session or as a warm-up before a long run, just to emphasise that point. So we can do some skipping. So these are A skips, and they promote that foot placement underneath the centre of mass. Again, if you look at the ground contacts, you can see that stiffness in the hip, knee, and ankle, and we can see that dorsiflexion of the ankle, so pre-tensing the calves before that ground contact, which is going to promote that stiffness. Another one we can do is high knee runs. So again, getting that foot contact underneath the hips, driving into the floor, and it also helps with our cadence as well. So so this promotes that foot placement under the centre of mass. Again, if you look at the hip, knee, and ankle, so on that ground contact, there's minimal range of motion around those joints at the ground contact, so maintaining that stiffness. It's also promoting a quick switch of the legs to promote that quick recovery to the next ground contact. So you can see they're pulling the heels up, using those hamstrings to pull the heels up to allow them to get that quick recovery for the next ground contact. Next thing we can look at is excessive transverse rotation. So if we can see on the video on the left here, we can see there's quite excessive rotation of the shoulders. And if you can look closer, there's that rotation of the hips as well. So one drill that we can do to improve that is we can get a dowel, put it over our shoulders, so whether it's a broomstick or a PVC pipe, put it on our shoulders, and we can do some high knee running drills or normal running, go through a normal running cycle. And the dowel on our shoulders kind of allows us to feel whether there's excessive transverse rotation and makes us activate our trunk during the running, brace the trunk during that running cycle to reduce that excessive transverse rotation. And if we've got something that looks like this, we're going to be leaking energy because we're not bracing that trunk. So a lot of forces that we produce in the ground go through our trunk to our upper body, as it all works as one. So a few exercises in the gym or at home that we can do to promote that trunk stiffness, to reduce the amount of rotational, to reduce the rotations as we're running. So we've got here on the left, again I think my laptop's working a bit too hard, so it's not playing as smooth as we want. So we can do a pull-off press, so we can attach a resistance band to a fixed point. You can do this standing, kneeling. This person here is in a half kneeling position, and we're pushing out that resistance band as fast as we can. And what the band or the cable is going to want to do is going to pull us out of that position. So we want to maintain the band in our middle of our chest and resist that force pulling us in. Another one we can do, simple things like shoulder taps. So again, once we go onto the one hand like that, gravity is going to want to pull us down on the unstable side, and what we want to do is want to maintain that stability in our hips and shoulders and not let gravity pull us down, again by bracing that trunk. Yeah, that's a bit of a smoother video for you. So it's a controlled motion, he's not rushing it. You do see some people rush that, and then what you can see then is a rotation of the hips. So it's bracing the trunk, maintaining that posture as you touch your shoulders. And another one we can do is side plank rows. So again, the cable is going to want to pull us out of our position, but we keep that trunk braced to resist those forces pulling us out of position. So if we have a quick look at excessive trunk lean, so as we can see on the image, it's a bit of a grainy image, but you can see there how there's a bit of trunk lean. But if there's excessive trunk lean, this can then lead to the foot strike being ahead of the projective centre of mass. And as I mentioned before, if we've got our foot landing in front of our centre of mass, there's going to be excessive braking forces to overcome and a loss of reactivity. So there's a few drills that we can do here to promote keeping that upright posture. So first one on the left here, so as you can see, he's doing some high knee skipping with a skipping rope. So he's having to keep himself upright during this, as if he comes out of position and starts to lean forward, he's going to get tangled up in the ropes. If we look at this video here, we can do some high skips. Again, it's doing a number of things here, so it's promoting that upward trunk. So I think there's some hurdles at the bottom here that she's skipping over. High knees over the hurdle, so it's promoting that upright trunk. Bracing that trunk there to maintain posture. Minimal rotation at the torso, as you can see there as well. And it's promoting that ground contact underneath the centre of mass. You can just about see she's using the hamstrings to pull the heels up towards bum and maintaining that dorsiflexion of the ankles as well. So hopefully there's a few drills there that you can incorporate into your track sessions as part of a warm-up, or part of your warm-up in your gym routine. And like I said, if you want me to go into more detail on those, I can do at a later time. So how do we incorporate S&C into our endurance training program? So as you've seen before, a lot of the research that I've presented has shown S&C training being added to their current running programs, apart from the one study that reduced running volume by 32% to then replace that with strength training and explosive training. But there's a couple of papers here which are quite good that I looked at when should I be incorporating S&C into endurance training program? How long should I be doing it for, and how often? So this paper here, I'll just get the pen. This paper suggested 2 to 3 supervised training sessions a week is likely to provide sufficient stimulus to improve parameters within a 16 to 14 week period. Benefits, so I've put the pen over there, but benefits are likely to be larger for interventions of a longer duration, which is evident in this this graph here. So it looked at improvements in running economy, so percentage change in running economy. As we can see, the longer that someone has trained for, the longer the athlete implements strength training into their program, the higher, the better the improvements in running economy are. So as we can see here, 6 week period is around about a 2.2% improvement in running economy, up to the 14% 14 week period we can see well over 7.5% improvement in running economy. So last little bit, so just a few take homes for this, a few suggestions for you if you're thinking about implementing any strength and conditioning training alongside your current running training. First thing to do is master those fundamental movement patterns first. So your squat pattern, lunge, your hinge pattern, so your deadlifts, your Romanian deadlifts and your hip thrusts. Mastering those upper body patterns as well, so you push, pull, and also being able to brace the trunk effectively in whether it's anti-extension, anti-flexion, and anti-rotation. So there's different ways you can challenge the trunk and resist forces from different directions for the trunk stabilization. So it's really important to master those movements first and become competent in those movements, because if you're not and you start to add load on a squat, for example, and you're not competent in the squat, it's going to increase your risk of injury. And when we come back to that myth that we mentioned at the start, so strength training increases my risk of injury. We've seen it doesn't. It actually reduces the risk of injury, but it does increase your risk of injury if you haven't mastered those fundamental movement patterns first and then start to add weight onto those exercises. Second point, develop strength through a structured and progressive resistance training program. So make sure it's progressive. Make sure you're regularly progressively overloading those movements or patterns that you're doing in order to progress. Without that progressive overload, so whether it's increasing weight, increasing volume, and manipulating those two variables in order to progress. If you stay the same and you do the same weight, the same reps each week, you're going to plateau and you're not going to see any more benefits to your running economy. Incorporate those drills and plyometric exercises in your warm-ups, whether it's a speed focus session or a track session. Incorporate those drills and plyometric exercises as part of your warm-up. Probably one of the two most important points I'll make in this lecture is if you're not sure where to put those strength and conditioning sessions in, my main advice would be keep the hard days hard and the easy days easy. So in your running program, you're going to have days where you've got an easy 30 minutes or an easy 60 minutes where it's a very easy pace, something that you can maintain for hours and hours upon end. Keep those days easy. Don't start, unless you have no other choice, try not to put your strength training sessions on those days, because you need those days for recovery. However, on your hard days, so if you've got a speed or a threshold session, do those in the morning if you can, or do those before your strength and conditioning session. You're going to be fatigued on those days, but it's important that you keep those easy days easy to allow yourself to recover from those hard days. And I've covered that point a little bit just so your running takes that priority. So if you can, run in the morning when you're less fatigued, and then incorporate your S&C session in the afternoon. If you can't do that, make sure you prioritize your running. So do the running first in the evening, and then if you've got time for a strength and conditioning session, whether it's like 15 minutes, half an hour, or an hour, if you've got that time, do it after you're running. But ideally leave 3, 4, 5 hours in between those sessions if you can. Above all else, be consistent. So try not to just do S&C training when you know you've got 18 weeks leading up to a marathon or an event. Make sure you're incorporating S&C throughout the year. So be consistent with that training. And don't do things that might negatively affect your consistency. So don't do anything that's too fatiguing where you know that you're going to have muscle soreness for days on end. That's really important. So if you think if you don't think an exercise or a training program that's going to positively affect your performance, and it's actually going to hinder your ability to be consistent with your training, then you shouldn't be doing it. Okay guys, so just a few resources there that I've used working with endurance runners, some that you might find helpful as well. So probably one of the best resources that I've ever used is this one from Richard Blagrove. You may have heard on a number of podcasts. Really good resource. It goes through resistance training exercises, plyometric exercises, the benefits of those training types on running economy, and also goes through running technique and how you can program that into your training. And there's a few other resources there. So Science of Running, which I've recently bought, and talks through running technique and training types as well, so resistance training, plyometric training, and this Developing Endurance from the NSCA. It looks at running, cycling, and swimming as well. So if there's any triathletes out there, that's quite useful. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you found it useful. If there's anything you want me to add in the future, please let me know.